Death Stranding 2. Let's talk about it. I'm a little late to the party with the Death Stranding franchise. It took me several years, 3 attempts, and 2 copies of the game on different platforms to finish the original Death Stranding. If you played Death Stranding 1, you know why. Those first several hours are a real slog. You can make the argument, and I absolutely would, that the first 40 hours are a real slog because nothing of actual significance to the plot happens until you connect that last knot on the chiral network. As far as Kojima remembers, he was supposed to include a story with this Amazon delivery simulator, and then we're suddenly going no breaks on the plot exposition express from that point forward. Now, this might sound like a cynical take on the Death Stranding, but the fact is, I still enjoyed the game when the credits rolled. I've been a big fan of Kojima since the original Metal Gear and the PlayStation 1. And while I believe he hasn't made a truly great game since Metal Gear Solid 3, I have a lot of problems with the cutscenes, narratives in 4, and MGS5 is clearly missing its third act. I still believe he is an artist at heart, and nobody is capable of making a game quite like Kojima. By the time I actually finished the original Death Stranding on stream, Death Stranding 2 was already out, so I dove right in. I was eager to see what lessons Kojima had learned from the first game, and if he could address my grievances with the gameplay and the story. So, did he actually pull it off? Well, yes and no. Death Stranding, I always argued, was what happened when you gave an auteur no oversights. Nobody to rap his knuckles and tell him when his ideas needed refinement. Just a bunch of yes man and sycophants to tell him what a visionary he was. And since the first game performed well and was critically acclaimed, Kojima clearly had no reason to think he should change and just repeat the same mistake again. Only harder and faster. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. Before I get into my problems with Death Stranding 2, let me preface this all by saying it's an incredibly well-made and highly polished experience. Gameplay-wise, it's improved across the board. There's more action to keep the player engaged, vehicles are easier to attain and more robust, and there's tons of new toys and gadgets to play with. And the BTs, which are such a massive hindrance in the first go-around, largely due to Kojima's addiction to giving them scripted, unavoidable appearances, are far more of an optional problem to deal with as you see fit. The visual style is unique and gorgeous, with some genuinely impressive sequences that left me with goosebumps more than once. And as a fully qualified Australian, I can even say that the way he depicted our fair land was astonishingly accurate. Except, of course, for the spiders the size of dogs that lay eggs in your stomach. So, with all this unabashed glazing of the man's work going on, how can I say the game is deeply flawed? Well, that's because Kojima just made the same game twice, except he did it worse this go-around. Death Stranding is a story of Sam Porter Bridges, traveling across the continent connected to the chiral network. Along the way, he finds himself battling a terrorist faction led by Higgs Monaghan, who is intent on sowing as much chaos as he can until we discover he's trying to kick off an extinction event in the Last Stranding to wipe out humanity once and for all in a final extinction event. But on the other hand, Death Stranding 2 is the story of Sam Porter Bridges, traveling across the continent connected to the chiral network. Along the way, he finds himself battling a terrorist faction led by Higgs Monaghan, who is intent on sowing as much chaos as he can until we discover he's trying to kick off the blah 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 blah. You get the idea. It's the same story twice. Now, I can already hear a lot of you in the comments fiercely typing, Red, you're being reductive. Sure, the premise is the same. Sure, he keeps having visions of a man through BB that will be ultimately revealed as someone deeply connected to his life that leaves a squad of skull-faced soldiers on the beach. Seriously, why did Kojima play that card twice? But will ultimately become his ally. Sure, it's revealed that one of Sam's blonde-haired female familial connections is revealed to be an extinction entity who can destroy the world. But damn it, there's a lot that's different too. So if you like the first game, what's wrong with this one?
It insists upon itself, Lois.
Okay, that was a cheap shot. But it also has a grain of salt that's true about it. One of my biggest complaints about Death Stranding 1 was that it just wasn't written very well. 40 hours of nothing, followed by 5 hours of truly exhaustive exposition dumping. Characters had a habit of being introduced, spewing exposition that you never asked for, complete with every piece of emotional trauma they've ever dealt with since their pet goldfish was flushed down the toilet, then disappearing from the plot, never to be seen again. Even if they did stick around, they'd really have no impact on the story overall. They were just window dressing in the Sam, Higgs, and Amelie show. Death Stranding 2 doubles down the faults of the original. While I do acknowledge that Kojima does make an effort to alleviate everyone's collective boredom with playing his greatest hits by throwing Higgs in this gloriously unhinged depiction by Troy Baker, seriously, he carries this game for me, and I don't care if you're sick of seeing him everywhere. Much earlier and much more prevalently in the story, and only set to highlight how inconsequential almost everything else is. Once Sam makes it to the land down under, the overall story grinds to a halt so we can spend the next 20 hours punching kangaroos, sending pizzas to VTubers, and living the life of a wagey who is committed to package delivery with a grind set mindset. Beyond getting the band back together on the DHV Magellan, and Higgs popping up from time to time to hint at vague mysteries while crapping out the scenery he ate in his last court-mandated cutscene, very little of consequence actually occurs on Sam's little walkabout to cope with the death of Lou. Except Sam forgot Lou was dead. This is easily my biggest issue with the story at large. Around the time the third act is ready to kick off, Sam reveals he's convinced that Lou is still alive and has been in her pod the whole time he's been power walking around Australia, getting chased by venomous emus. But how could Sam have forgotten that his adoptive and later actual child we discover is dead? Especially when Higgs of all people never missed an opportunity to remind Sam that she was dead. Kojima is a man who seems to revel in explaining every last detail of his stories, right up until the point where he wants to be ambiguous. And he does so love being ambiguous when it suits him. The reveal that Sam has forgotten Lou is dead comes from nowhere and is never explained. It's simply left ambiguous enough that the player can assume at some point in their vision quest, Sam silently decided that the best way to cope with his grief was to simply pretend it never happened. Except it did happen, right until we discover it actually didn't, with Sam himself asking Higgs to his face if he was the one who killed Lou during that second confrontation. We can go into the minutiae of how justified this twist is with whatever breadcrumbs are placed throughout the story, but instead I propose a far simpler explanation for this dramatic reveal. After the game was released, Kojima admitted that the game was well into development when he decided to rewrite the story. In a statement that would make Neil Druckmann blush, Kojima stated that people were enjoying the game too much, and that to him, that enjoyment meant the game wasn't challenging or confronting enough. It was too pedestrian and too commercial, so he just decided to rewrite the story. We don't know how much of the story was rewritten and what needed to be reshot, but here's what I do know. Reshoots are expensive. Troy Baker is expensive. Frankensteining your story back together and leaving it up to the player to fill in the gaps is cheap. You can do the math from here. The story is littered with evidence of this theory. Higgs planning on creating a new world built on violence before changing his mind and trying to wipe out humanity. Again, Neil Vana being completely superfluous as a character. The Red Samurai never being properly explained. Yes, I know he was revealed to be Dead Man, but he later gets possessed by Higgs. And if he was Dead Man in his earlier appearances, then why didn't Dead Man just say so, instead of making gurgling noises like a baby and then play a Batman in a game where everyone can't wait to explain themselves? Fragile having a bout of explosive amnesia. Apas's grand plan being revealed only to be immediately shut down by Die Hartman's aura farming. Higgs being astonished by the contents of Lou's pod when it's later revealed the pod is empty. Sam developing the ability to teleport because it's convenient to the plot. Jump Shock preventing Fragile from teleporting when it's convenient to the plot. Or Higgs initially being surprised that Lou is dead when he later admits to being the one that killed her. The list goes on and on. I could make this whole video about the plot holes this game has, which Kojima expects you to fill yourself, but we both have better ways to spend our time. That's not to say the story isn't without merit. I did enjoy Higgs' character arc, and the revelation that he spent tens of thousands of years wandering the beach before Minecrafting himself does a great job of explaining his cartoonish levels of supervillainy, as well as his newfound obsession with Sam that borders on a twisted form of fondness. But overall, I have to ask myself, how much leeway do you give a writer for leaving ambiguity and gaps in the story that is left for the player to fill before you call it bad writing? Everything I have listed here and more can be explained, but I already know that. The world is set up in such a way that between Dooms, Chiral Matter, the beach, and the Death Stranding itself, you can explain just about any event, ability, or plot device. But that's all because it's intentionally vague. Those of us who are a believer in the Emperor's New Clothes will be telling Kojima that his fit is in fact legit. I can keep going with my grievances about the game. I could talk about the insufferable needle drops that can't be turned off and get my Twitch VODs muted. Or how the game is packed with twists that exist for the sake of being twists. I mean, Higgs is the one who killed Lou? Man, it's always the ones you expect the most. Or how trying to make us feel bad about a character dying in a world where death is known quantity and the afterlife has been commercialized to the point that it's an internet hub is pretty meaningless. But believe it or not, I don't like being negative. I take no pleasure in making this video. I made this video because I want more of us to be critical of Kojima, to stop glazing the man and pretending everything he does must be genius, even if we don't understand it. Because I want him to do better. I've seen him at his best, when he's telling stories that helped shape my perception of the world to this day, and filled me with passion to help make that world a better place. When we inevitably get Death Stranding 3, I want it to be something that lives up to the promise of what 1 and 2 could have been. Not the poorly paced, ill-defined games that we got. And the only way we can do that is if voices exist to remind him that just because you tell us it's deep, doesn't mean that it is.